Part of what we do in the Bitcoin space is make complex topics and long videos easily digestible for short attention spans.
In 2014, Julian Assange appeared as a hologram with the Nantucket Project while he was living at the Ecuadorian Embassy in the UK. In that time, in 2014, he had a better grasp of Bitcoin and its potential than it seems most do today. Let's watch.
Right now, the most interesting thing happening is Bitcoin. It's probably the most interesting intellectual development on the internet in the last 5 years. A lot of people will have heard about Bitcoin but not really understand it. So you think, okay, it's some online currency, what's the big deal? There's, you can have a PayPal account, that's kind of like an online currency, or even your Visa card. Well, actually all the processing occurs online. Isn't that really like an online currency? Or you can buy gold, that's kind of like an online currency. But Bitcoin is different because it is a currency that cryptographically backed, multi-jurisdictional, which means that it's very hard for any one power group in any particular jurisdiction to start turning it into a rent-seeking apparatus. The underlying technology of Bitcoin is cryptography on the one hand, and the ability for cryptography to create situations that can defend itself or the people who use it against even the full might of a superpower. A full might of a superpower doesn't help you smash a mass problem. A mass problem is a mass problem, and it's something that is connected to the existence of intelligence in the universe or basic physics. It's not something you can get at simply through overwhelming coercive power or lots of people. And the other underlying basic technology is proof of publication at a particular time. And we've never really had that. In the digital world, we can delete history extremely easily, and history, even without an attempt to delete it, starts disappearing as a result of startup companies going under or particular bits of history not becoming profitable anymore. And that notion of being able to disappear history entered into Orwell's writing, and you can look at what is, I think, his most substantive intellectual comment, which is he who controls the present controls the past, he who controls the past controls the future. And it's this notion that the past, as an archive, as a history of our civilization, as a history of development, is in fact present right now in something physically contained in the library, in computer servers, in human beings' heads. That history doesn't exist except remnants that exist in the present. And so if you can get at these remnants, you can make particular inconvenient parts of history disappear and amplify others. Bitcoin, in its underlying technology, breaks Orwell's dictum. It breaks Orwell's dictum by providing proof of publishing at a certain time. And that is the intellectual underpinning of that whole system and can be used for lots and lots of other things. And so that's the big expansion we're about to see in Bitcoin. All derives from this basic premise that you can prove that a particular statement, a particular consensus, a particular contract happened at a particular time globally, and it requires the subversion of every single jurisdiction where people are running Bitcoin to overturn that.
We say Bitcoin is freedom, but freedom is not free. Freedom is fought for, and Julian Assange and his family are still fighting for it.
The attack on Julian Assange is an attack on free speech. A panel moderated by Peter McCormack, host of the What Bitcoin Did podcast. Please give Peter a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. This is going to be a very, very important panel. I'm going to introduce people out one by one. I think we should give them a very warm round of applause. Firstly, invite Julian's wife, Stella, out. So let's give a huge round of applause.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Julian's brother, Gabe.
Just getting his...
There he is. And lastly, we have Julian's father, John Shipton. And for those who haven't seen it, there was a film released about Julian recently called Ithaca. About halfway through this, we're going to be showing the trailer. So when we have a short pause for that, you'll know where that's coming. I've been fortunate enough to interview all of you at separate times to talk about Julian and his story. But I just think, just for a starting point for the audience here, we'll start with you, Stella. Just introduce people, let them know about yourself and the work you've been doing to support your husband.
So I met Julian in 2011, 11 years ago now. And I first met him because I was part of his legal team. And so I have seen, a long process of persecution, which has culminated in Julian now being in Belmarsh for over 3.5 years, facing 175 years for his work. We got married in March this year. We have 2 children. They're 3 and 5 years old. That's me.
And Gabriel, we've met a few times now, talked all about the story of Julian, but if you can just tell everyone the kind of things that you've been doing to support him.
Yeah, I'm Gabriel Shipton. Julian's brother. Been advocating for Julian since around 2019 when he was taken into the prison at Belmarsh. I'm a film producer as well, and we've produced this film Ithaca that has been playing in Lugano for the past few days and will continue to play over the next weeks. But just been advocating to all these different communities around the world, particularly in the US, with the Bitcoin community especially, trying to get the real story out, what's really going on here, what's happening to Julian, what it means to Bitcoiners, and basically what it means to Bitcoiners and technologists, yeah.
And John, I think it's about 3 years ago we met in that cafe in London. Yeah. We had a good chat and managed to meet up with you a few times since as well. Just introduce yourself and what you've been doing also to support Julian.
Hello everybody, thanks for coming. My name is John Shipton, Julian's father. In about the same circumstance that Gabrielle just described, when Julian was dragged out of that embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy in London. You may have seen the film of that event. I note about that circumstance was against the conventions of asylum, which a principal signatory of both Ecuador and the United Kingdom. There was no due process involved. Also, what is really notable is that the Ecuadorian ambassador invited the United Kingdom police into the embassy. That is, he invited the United Kingdom police force onto Ecuadorian territory. These 3 really important events that reverberate right through South America and right through the administration of the conventions of asylum. So just take that as a general introduction to the vicious hatred that constitutes the persecution of Julian Assange.
So this is a conference about Bitcoin. A lot of people here will know about Julian's backstory and the story of how when WikiLeaks was censored by all payment rails and had to move to accepting Bitcoin to be able to finance the good work that WikiLeaks has done. There will be people following this online and watching the live streams as well who maybe don't know the full backstory, Stella. So could you just do a bit of an introduction of who Julian is and why he's currently being held in a UK prison?
Julian is a publisher. He has dedicated his life to free speech. He has a technical background. He was a cryptographer to begin with in his early 20s. He was on the cypherpunks emailing list. And he made important code, the rubber hose and so on. And then eventually he moved into journalism. And he had the project WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks has different aspects to it, but it uses cryptography in order to anonymize sources, and it also uses decentralization in order to withstand censorship. So WikiLeaks, with WikiLeaks, Julian understood that you need to look at different jurisdictions and the strengths of different jurisdictions to be able to secure the historical record. Because there's a very interesting speech that Julian gave in 2010 at the Oslo Freedom Forum, which I watch now and then. And he basically set out the problem with information on the internet. And this was 2010, but this phenomenon had already started happening. That, you read an article, and then 6 months later, you think, oh, I want to check that article again. And then you go, you see reference to it, you find the URL, and then there's a 404, this page doesn't exist. No explanation, and it's basically scrubbed off the internet. Of course, this is, we've all had that experience, but Julian understood that you can do that with history, and recent history, and it happens all the time. And that's why he started WikiLeaks as a way to keep the integrity of the historical and contemporary historical record. And so WikiLeaks in 2010 published the biggest scoop in journalistic history globally. I mean, I think no one would dispute this. It was 5 publications that came from a US military source, Chelsea Manning, about the Iraq War, the Afghan War, the US State Department cables, Guantanamo Bay prison detainee camp, and a very famous video called Collateral Murder. If you haven't seen Collateral Murder, please watch it, because if it's one thing that you see of WikiLeaks, that's it. Because it basically encompasses what WikiLeaks does and why Julian is in prison.
With that video, I've seen it obviously, it's the helicopter video. Do you want to just explain to people what actually happens in that video? Because I think it will set out why WikiLeaks was so important, or is so important.
So it was released in 2010, and the way the Iraq War was being reported at the time was through embedded journalists that went with the US military, and you had very sanitized reports about the Iraq and Afghan wars. And so this was a video from a US helicopter, a gunship helicopter. And so you see it through the viewfinder of the gunners, and you see people in the streets of Baghdad, and they're just walking and looking around, and they mistake a camera for a gun, and shoot this group of people who were just walking around the streets of Baghdad, and kill them. And you can see how they kill them in extremely disturbing detail. And their bodies are ripped apart, you can see it. 2 of them were Reuters journalists. What happens after that is even worse. What happens after that is undisputably a war crime. And that's that one of these journalists is still alive, and he's crawling for cover because the helicopter is still shooting. And he's crawling for cover, and a black van appears. And inside the black van was a father taking his children to school. And he stops the car because he sees a man severely injured on the street. Obviously, you can't see the helicopter because it's so far up, right? And the van stops, and this guy comes out, with someone else who was also in the van, and they tried to take the injured man into the back of the van. And the helicopter shoots the van and kills the Good Samaritan that helped. And it was clearly not, this is a war crime when you go after the people who are coming to the aid of the injured. The 2 children miraculously survived, but only because the father threw his body on top of them. They were severely injured. Anyway, so this collateral murder, evidence of a war crime. Julian faces 175 years. 40 years relate to that release. Okay, so this was 2010. In 2019, when Julian was dragged out of the embassy, the US revealed that it was seeking his extradition for the publication of the Iraq war logs, Afghan war logs, the Cablegate, and this is just one example. Those publications also revealed torture in Guantanamo Bay, which is a kind of black site, and how the US, and I think this part is especially interesting to you, how the US uses its power to basically railroad other countries and their sovereignty and their legal systems. And this is we can talk about it later, but there's specific cases about how in Europe they were trying to start investigations in relation to US CIA rendition and so on, and the US embassy interfered in that process and basically killed it off, neutralized what Germany, what Spain, what Italy was trying to do, following their own judicial processes where US interests were concerned. Julian's fighting extradition. He's been charged under the US Espionage Act. It's completely unprecedented, the first time they use the Espionage Act against a publisher. He's not accused of espionage per se. There's no allegation that he was working on behalf of another government. Basically, they're defining journalistic activity of receiving, possessing, and communicating information to the public as a crime. And then you have the extraterritorial nature of this prosecution. Julian is an Australian citizen. He wasn't in the United States. So basically the US is, with this case, basically declaring universal jurisdiction over other countries, journalists, foreigners working abroad, and the protections that are supposed to protect you within your own jurisdictions don't matter, because they're going to pluck you and put you on trial in the United States.
Gabriel, Julian's a very important person to everyone in this room because of not only his work, but his work supporting freedom and freedom through free money. He spent a number of years in the Ecuadorian embassy. He's now been in Belmarsh for 3.5 years, which is a god-awful UK prison. I think people would love to know just like, how is he doing? How is his mental state? You are the few people to get to see him occasionally. I think people would like to know how he's doing.
Yeah, Julian, as you said, he's been held in a maximum security prison for the last 3.5 years. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Melzer, who's actually from Switzerland, went to see him in 2019 and took 2 experts with him who identify the symptoms or have experience in assessing people who are suffering the effects of psychological torture. And so those experts and this professor found that Julian was suffering the effects of psychological torture. He's been psychological tortured. And the situation that Julian's in is the same now as it was then. So that's 3.5 years ago that they released their report that was, ignored by the UK, essentially. So his health is in decline. He's in a sort of precarious state health-wise. He had a minor stroke last October. So that is evidence of this sort of never-ending process, this punishment by process that Julian's been put through is crushing him physically, and that is evidence of that. I went and saw him, and we try and, he still has a fire inside him. He still has that fire to keep fighting this. And that's always stands out when I go and see him, when I speak to him. He's fighting this case against him, and he understands the implications that it has, not just for him, but for everybody else. And it's not just his fight, but everyone else's fight. And we often talk when we're there about, coming to speak to people like this and the sort of worldwide wave of support that is out there for Julian. There's parliamentary groups in most every Western democracy. There are groups of parliamentarians. There are, Germany has 92, France has 49, even the UK has 26 in their parliament. There are world leaders now who are calling out the US. You've got the Prime Minister in Australia who's saying enough's enough, that they are doing diplomatic talks with the US to try and end this situation. So you have world leaders now who are backing in Julian. And so all this information that we bring him, lifts his spirits and keeps him going, knowing that there are people out there all around the world, who are fighting for him, and he's fighting for them as well through this. It's the sort of once in a lifetime fight. This one, Julian, as we said before, was on the cypherpunk mailing list. We've got a few of other people at this conference who are also on the site. Adam Baknit, Sabo, who are both speaking. And Bitcoin and WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks was like this decentralization of media, decentralization of leaks, and it identified this centralization of media and leaks, identified that problem in the media, and sought to use the architecture of the internet, sought to use encryption and Tor to solve this problem, to make a magnet for leaks where people could submit anonymously, and sort of Bitcoin grew and digital money grew from the same sort of group. It was, how do we solve this centralization of the banking system? And so really, what Julian's done is using this technology to sort of break apart the corporate media structure and legacy media, and that's why they've gone after him. They're making an example of him to everyone else, saying that if you use this technology, if you use encryption, if you use the architecture of the internet to make these radical ideas that benefit everyone and not just the establishment, we're going to come after you. And when I talk to Bitcoiners here, it's interesting, some of the very high-profile ones, they say, this isn't, I said, oh, can you help us? Because they've got a lot of power now. Bitcoin's developed, it's all around the globe, and they're scared. They're scared that helping Julian will turn the spotlight onto them. But I think what's important to understand is that if Bitcoiners and we can free Julian, then the attacks will stop. If we defend Julian, if we free him, if we're able to release him from prison, then we're standing up to this hegemon that says, oh, we can reach into any country we like and take away all your rights if you go against us.
I think we're going to show the... I believe we're going to show the trailer now for Ithaca. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
I don't have a play button, so...
I'm attempting to get Julian out of the ship.
Julian Assange is the hero of our time.
One of the most notorious and controversial figures in custody.
The maximum jail sentence of 175 years.
How
does it feel to be the father of such a controversial figure, somebody who's known around the world?
Was that him on the phone before? Yeah. What are you talking about on a kind of regular basis?
It looks as though what journalists do for a living is seen to be a criminal act.
What are your worst fears?
That it just collapses under the strain. What's at stake? If he goes down, so will journalism. We're here because we have a child in the ship. We want to get him out.
John, you alluded to it in the trailer there, what is at stake, but you have a bit longer now here. Can you just tell everybody what is at stake here with Julian's case?
Oh, geez, that's a big question and a good one. All of the great advances of the mid-20th century, the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, incidentally an Australian was along with Eleanor Roosevelt, was the author of the principal author of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. 1958, the Conventions of Asylum. 1973-74, ratified at the United Nations General Assembly. The due process came into being in about 800 years ago, Magna Carta, as a shield between the sovereign in those days, now the state, and the people. The state and the people relate to each other through a body of laws. We know that by the phrase due process. Every aspect of due process has been abandoned in the case of Julian Assange. It roughly means that in the English context, that each side be equally armed. Julian is in a glass box at the back of the stage with a raised floor. In order to speak to his lawyers, he gets on his knees and speaks through a 30mm or 1.5-inch crack in the glass box, while the barrister or solicitor or lawyer on the other side stands on their tippy toes. And he whispers into their ears, and this so-called whispering is heard by the prosecution, which sit comfortably with their lawyers in the well of the court. An application before the judge to move Julian into the well of the court, the judge said, it's not my responsibility, it's the responsibility of the prison. The prison says it's not our responsibility, it's the responsibility of the lawyer. Kafka couldn't do it better. So that this bureaucratic removal of rights is continuous. I just give those examples. Julian's human rights. The United Nations Rapporteur on Torture, as Gabriel just reported, made a determination, 26 pages long, submitted to the United Nations General Assembly, accepted by the United Nations General Assembly, and ignored by the very authors, the United Kingdom and the United States and Sweden, ignored by the authors of those conventions and signatories to those conventions. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, 2017, made a determination that Julian was arbitrarily detained and ought to be freed and paid compensation by those states, the United States, Sweden and the United Kingdom. The report was derided by the signatories, the United Kingdom principally, in Parliament. The relevant minister said that these people who composed the United Nations Working Group were just people who wandered in off the street. The United Kingdom appealed against the determination. The working group reiterated their determination in more forceful language in 2018 February. So they're the three principal elements that hold us together as people and as states, able to relate to each other through a body of laws, to settle our differences through laws, all of them trashed, smashed by the United Kingdom, Sweden, and the United States. And this reflects upon us, as Gabriel just mentioned, that the capacity of the United States takes upon itself to reach into any society, anywhere, and pluck out those that it doesn't like for the moment, who it feels that the Department of Justice or the CIA or one or other of the United States institutions feel that you've offended them. They take you out and throw you into a dungeon for 175 years. This is a bleak circumstance that I describe, but there are means to, well, I see this, that Julian Assange and his freedom falls upon the shoulders of civil society. There are no lawyers going to get Julian out. They will helpfully delay and fight ferociously and fiercely for the application of laws. But it is a veil over a political persecution. The point is to remove from us the capacity to relate to each other through the accumulation of knowledge. And just a last point, which interests me, is that Julian, in a brilliant moment of insight, understood that you could hold on the internet information which all people all over the world who had an access to a computer, any library could access this information and build a body of knowledge with which they could review government policy or create policy. For all genius, in my view, emerges from the mass, from us. So that, and in Bitcoin, again another thing that attracts me, is the capacity to decentralize and have a peer-to-peer relationship so that we can extend, deepen, and further our understanding of each other and our contribution to the structure and nature of our communities. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but I think I covered the stuff.
As it's been said, Stella, he's been in Belmarsh now for 3.5 years. What is the current legal status? We're aware that his extradition was originally rejected, and sadly Priti Patel got involved and overturned this. What is the current legal status? What are the next steps and what are the key dates?
I get this question a lot, and then I immediately reject it.
Okay.
Because it basically buys into the illusion that this is a legal case and this is a legal process and that this is a perfectly normal, under control situation. And really it's a political case. And it should, in my view, always be understood in those terms. So we can talk about process, but the process to me is irrelevant. The process is a means through which Julian's punishment and incarceration and silencing is being furthered.
Well, then I have a different question. How do we break down and destroy this process? Like, what can we do? What can people here do?
Well, it's partly through understanding. An understanding that this isn't just about Julian. As as Gabriel was saying, Julian is a pioneer, a tech pioneer, and we see how recently there was an arrest of a developer in the Netherlands, and you know, what they've done to Julian is part of a push and a trend towards taking out, and with the arrest and attempted extradition of the Huawei CEO, of using extradition and the criminal justice system in order to further the US administration's political agenda, and you know, its allies. So what can be done? Well, it's hard to say in general terms, because each of you, you're seated here, you're obviously interesting people, each with your own networks and interests and capacities. There has to be a concerted effort to free Julian in each and every level of society, political, legal, at the grassroots level, the cultural level, and that's why the Bitcoin community is so important. I mean, you'll remember, you referred to it earlier, and maybe you have all heard it many times, but when Julian was publishing these Manning leaks in 2010, there was a banking blockade. And how did that banking blockade happen? Well, extrajudicially. Basically, there was a couple of senators that called up Bank of America and PayPal, and then PayPal, Bank of America, Visa, MasterCard, and a few others got together and said, well, we're going to stop donations to WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks at the time was receiving, and still just receives, donations from the public. That's how it stays independent. And it was receiving, the average donation was $25, and it was receiving something like 100,000 a day at the peak of the publications. So they stopped it from one day to the next. And then WikiLeaks was able to litigate this in Iceland with a Icelandic intermediary for Visa, and won the case eventually in Iceland. So basically, if they have the means and the power, they will use their power to pressure other governments to do, what they want. And I was referring to this earlier. In Germany, I mean, Germany, you know, a pretty powerful state, tried to investigate the torture and rendition of one of its own citizens, Khalid al-Masri, who was abducted and flown to a black site in Iraq, and he was tortured. And then after he was tortured for a few weeks, the CIA realized they had the wrong Khalid al-Masri, and so they dumped him in Albania. And then he went back to Germany, and no one believed him that he had been just taken by the Americans and tortured. And he was treated like a madman for a while. He tried to litigate in the United States eventually. They threw out the case because it concerned national defense matters. He eventually won his case in the European Court of Human Rights against Macedonia and Albania, but not against the United States, and used WikiLeaks cables that referred to his rendition in order to win his case. The case against Julian is an attack not only on press freedom globally, because Julian's Australian, he was in the UK, it's nothing to do with the US except he exposed US crimes. But it is a collapse of legal safeguards that have an extremely pernicious effect, not just on the rest of the press, but on free speech and on the sovereignty of other countries to be able to enforce their own rules. And so maybe Gabriel has something more specific, but what I want to emphasize is that it's urgent that Julian be freed, and it's not some faraway thing. The European Parliament just shortlisted Julian, one of 3 finalists for the Sakharov Prize. This is the European Parliament's peak human rights award, Freedom of Thought Award. How can you have the US wanting to put Julian in prison for 175 years, and meanwhile the European Parliament shortlisting him as one of the top Freedom of Thought human rights prizes of 2022? So there's a huge tension. This case is very controversial in the United States. Julian's imprisonment is very controversial in the United Kingdom. It's a political case, and that means that political pressure, and that means cultural pressure, pressure from the business community, etc., plays a role and can actually get this across the line and free him.
Yes, Gabe, what can people here do? What do you want? What's the actions you want from people?
Well, you know, I think I read this thing online the other day, and I think it goes for a lot of movements, or you know, when you're starting a business, or you know, anything. This cooperation just starts with a couple of people, 2 or 3 people getting together with good information, having a coffee, a cup of tea, or a beer, or whatever, and talking about how can we get together and do something. How can we solve this problem? And I think that's important, particularly for people here. You know, I mean, you've come here for starters, and that's fantastic. Like, you've taken this first step to find out more about what's going on. But you know, talk to your friends, and particularly people here at a Bitcoin conference. And what we always try and say is that, you know, this community is, you know, it's got some amazing minds. You know, the most intelligent people. Some of the most intelligent people in the tech world are in the Bitcoin community, and they've amassed this sort of global network now. You know, there's these conferences all over the world. It's amazing. So there's this global, worldwide network of Bitcoiners who have links to everywhere. Like, they've got links in government, they've got you know, links in big business, like links to artists, all this sort of stuff. It's an amazingly powerful community. So I think, you know, people from this community, if they get together and start talking about this as a problem that needs to be solved, that will benefit everybody, like Stella was mentioning. I mean, this is Julian. What's happening to Julian's emblematic of this sort of global descent into arbitrariness that, you know, like with the, you know, the Tornado Cash developer, or OFAC sanctioning Bitcoin addresses. Like, where does this end? You know what I mean? Where do we take a stand, and where do we stand up? And Julian's case is emblematic of that, of that arbitrariness. And so if we can solve this problem, then the rest of these problems will be easy for this community to solve. So yeah, that's my first thing, is get together, have a chat with your friends about coming up with ways that, you know, you can work on this problem. Upstairs, there's a VR experience that was put together by the Plan B forum. Go and try that out. John did the narration for it, so yeah, it's pretty cool. There's also a little table up there. You know, put down your email address, and you'll get updates of what's going on, you know, where there are actions around the place. I don't know how many of you actually go to like street protests or anything, but you should try it out one day if you're, you know.
There's merchandise as well.
Yeah, there's pins and badges and stuff like that. Follow Stella or follow myself on Twitter. You know, our DMs are always open. You know, send us ideas. I was speaking to one gentleman, Jaco, before, he's here. He's a lawyer in Costa Rica, part of the Human Rights Court of Latin America. And so he's going to start doing stuff for the Human Rights Court of Latin America. So these interesting connections that we can make at these conferences, and I think that is the most important thing to do, is get together and talk about it. And yeah, I'm sure you'll come up with something cool.
John, it came out recently that there was a CIA plot to perhaps try and murder Julian. How much do we know about that?
Oh,
And what does that tell us about the seriousness and the urgency of this?
oh, gee, you know, the CIA. I'm not really across that. I think you better ask Gabrielle or Stella.
Okay, I'll come back to you afterwards, Stella. What do we know about this?
Well, it came out of a report a year ago now. 3 national security reporters in Washington, D.C., who, you know, they're very established, and they had this amazing investigation. They interviewed over 30, that's 30, over 30 national security officials under the Trump administration, people from the CIA and from the National Security Council, who revealed that during Trump's presidency, when Pompeo was the head of the CIA, there had been specific plans, not just to go after Julian in some abstract sense, but to kidnap him, to rendition him, and even to assassinate him. And having experienced that period, this is end of 2017 into 2018, leading up to Julian's arrest, there was a concerted effort of intimidation on every level. There was a reputational attack from Julian, constant, relentless fabrications in the press, the mainstream press. The Guardian published a completely fabricated story on its front page, which now everyone knows, and the Guardian itself has, well, basically...
a shit rag.
So this was the political, this was the perception attack on Julian in order to try to reduce his political capital leading up to his arrest. When you're fighting a political case, if you don't have political support, it's very difficult to fight it. So that was, you know, and inside the embassy, it felt very, very scary. I felt that anything could happen to Julian. And it's very interesting how just instinctively you feel these things. And there was this investigation in the United States, but there was also whistleblowers in Spain. So as soon as Julian was arrested in 2019, 2 people went first to El País and then to the Spanish police and revealed that they had taken part in operations, secret operations inside the embassy against Julian, and that they had been told by their boss that they were working for the CIA, and that they had discussed how to poison Julian, how to leave the door open so he could be taken away deniably, how they had received instructions to take the DNA of our 6-month-old baby. So we knew the kind of implementation, operational side of it, but then last year we had this investigation by these 3 national security reporters that revealed kind of the Pompeo plan. This is how far it's gone, you know, that Mike Pompeo, and the reason they spoke to the journalists were because even within the CIA and National Security Council, there was like, hold on, this is going too far. But, you know, who knows if Pompeo's back, and the fact that the extradition case is even still in the courts with this information out, that Julian, there was plots to assassinate him. Not only that, there's evidence because terabytes of information have been seized from this security company in Spain, and there's going to be a criminal trial against the CEO, showing that even Julian's legal meetings were being spied on, like deliberately spied on. The hard disks were physically transferred to the United States. There's incredible detail about this. So it's complete lawlessness and criminality. And the only criminality there is here is on the part of the United States, not just in relation to Julian and his lawyers and our child, in relation to Iraq and the innocent civilians that were killed, and no one has gone to prison for that. perpetrators of those crimes have never faced trial. And Julian has been in prison for 3.5 years because he put that information into the public domain.
We're coming to a close shortly, John.
Yes.
What would you like people here to leave? What kind of message would you like to leave with people? How do you want them to, what do you want to leave with them in terms of the thoughts about everything we've talked about today?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I combine it with what to do, the perennial question, what can we do? So around about the place, just to give a few examples, in Austria the Facebook page has 47,000 people. In France, 35,000 on one, 37,000 on another. In Australia, the petition has 820,000 signatories. The petition in Germany, 450,000. The petition in the United Kingdom, 350,000. And so it goes. We toured the United States, 16 cities in, I think, 3 weeks. And at every event, we had a crowd, and in some cases, full house. In Oakland's, we had over 1,000 people that's donated $14,000 to the campaign. So the impression that I'd like to leave you with is that it's a heartfelt, worldwide, global sensibility rising up in the hearts of people. The interviewer this morning asked me, was it Kant's categorical imperative that we have within our breasts a yearning for justice and a revulsion at the sight of injustice. So I'd just like to leave with the impression that worldwide we have found we are uplifted by the support that it manifests and pours forth as a Niagara pours forth to support Julian. And thank you. Yeah.
Gabriel, if people want to find out more, they want to support this, where would you send them? And if they want to watch the film, where would you send them?
Well, the film's playing 3 times a day as part of the festival, as part of the forum schedule, so you can go and check that out. Otherwise, you can go to ithacamovie.com to find out where it's playing next. We'll be we're having our North American premiere in New York on the 13th at Doc NYC. The SVA Theatre for any Americans here, come down. You can, there's the table upstairs where you can take the email. Particularly, I think, Twitter, Stella or myself on Twitter, we're always keeping up to date. And as I said, the DMs are open. So, just open up your phone and follow Stella or I on Twitter. And, you'll be up to date with the latest goings on around the world. It seems like it's pretty hectic now. Like, we can... there's always some news somewhere that we're feeding into the thing. So you get a real idea of the size and the scope of the global movement that's happening,
Anything to add as we close out?
You can also donate to the legal fight or the campaign. The Val Holland Foundation, that's WAU, Holland Foundation in Germany. It's tax deductible within the EU. And accepts crypto as well, and don't extradite Assange. And Julian's a freedom fighter, fights for technological emancipation, for free speech, and now we need to free the freedom fighter.
Yeah. Free Assange.